All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for being here tonight. My name is Mitch Boersma. I'm the executive vice president here at the CIC, and I have the privilege of welcoming all of you here tonight in person and those joining on the live stream for our next installment of Napa Nights before handing it over here to Napa Institute president Mark Relena so we can introduce Dan Cellucci and his new book, Clean Up on Aisle 9, Learning About Leadership, Life, and the Lord in the Day-to-Day. So now, as I was first drafting this, I wrote in my notes that Mark here would be introducing our friend Dan, and I won't speak for Mark, but I stopped short because I realized the truth is that Dan and I aren't really friends yet, or in the traditional way. I mean, we're not enemies, I don't think, and we've crossed paths in meetings and events, but other than that, we really haven't had much time together before tonight. But I said I kind of do think of Dan as a friend, but now with this realization that up to this point, it's been one of those strange one-way friendships that you have with like your morning DJ or your favorite podcaster, where you know all sorts of insanely personal details about them, and they know nothing about you and wouldn't know you from Adam. So that's our friendship, where I'm the fanboy who's been reading and receiving Dan's weekly leadership reflections in my inbox for so long now that I kind of feel like old buddies, and it's a testament to the quality and the impact of these reflections, not just on me, but on the thousands of other readers that Dan has taken with him on this leadership journey at Catholic Leadership Institute since taking on the role as a CEO nearly a decade ago. And now that this collection has hit critical mass and incarnated into this very handsome book, and I mean this as a compliment, it is truly like the highest end of bathroom reading, where you can pick it up and go day to day or right in the middle, anywhere you want. You can always get something out of it. And as good as these daily reflections are, I think my favorite part of the book are the reviews in the back from his family, which I will close with here before handing it over to Mark. The first one from daughter Annie: I didn't agree to this. Katie: lies, all lies. Peter: this book is amazing, but I'm also the favorite. From Nora: this will be a great resource for my therapist one day. And his wife Trisha: you can't believe how bad the grammar is on the first draft. So with those glowing reviews, I will hand it over for Mark for a little bit more of a formal introduction.
Well, thanks, Mitch. Hard to follow that. Good evening, everyone. Really appreciate everyone coming out and taking part in this Napa Nights events at the CIC, one of our great collaborations with Mitch and the CIC. As you know, Napa Institute is dedicated to empowering Catholic leaders to renew the church and to transform the culture. Our work is built on the pillars of formation, liturgy, and community. And tonight we get a special treat: Dan Cellucci, a leader to leaders and one of our own board members, to take us through his new book, which I think Mitch has appropriately whetted the appetite for what we're going to hear tonight. But we're excited to hear more about his insight. You should buy the book, which you can do right outside this room, and online. Where should they go online? Amazon to buy the book. So please do get it and read it. But before I introduce Dan for his remarks, just a few notes about what Napa Institute is up to these days. There's still time for folks to join our April 9th Citizens of Faith Conference, which is taking place not too far from here in Crystal City. We've got a great lineup of speakers just kind of taking us through the landscape as it stands now after the 2024 election. And if you're a Catholic wanting to know what's going on and what you ought to do in this moment, you'll want to attend. So please join us. Of course, planning for our flagship summer conference is well underway. Our theme is Doers of the Word, Faith, Hope, and Charity in the work of personal conversion and renewal of the world. We hope you can join us July 23rd to the 27th in beautiful Napa Valley in California. We've announced Bishop Eric Varden of Norway, Sister Miriam James, Curtis Martin, Father Robert Spitzer, and Tim Gray as speakers, and more announcements to come in the days ahead. The summer conference this year will be preceded by an arts festival for the first time. It will include movies by Catholic filmmakers, traditional art, and music. And we really hope this art festival quickly becomes a place where people want to showcase their attempts to reclaim the arts for Christ. So that will be an exciting thing to take part in. Our annual Eucharistic procession in Midtown Manhattan will take place on October 14th, with our Faith and Business Conference the next day. We have Father Ambrose Christie, Sean Cardinal O'Malley, and Timothy Cardinal Dolan assisting us with the Mass and Benediction. So you want to be there. And last year we had close to 5,000 people going through Midtown Manhattan. Really a sight to see. Our Faith and Business Conference will focus on artificial intelligence and feature foremost experts on the subject, as well as trying to put some moral bounds on the AI situation as it starts to continually unfold here for us. So we've got a lot more going on too that I won't share, but please go to napa-institute.org to kind of see everything, and please register for our events. And now I am happy to introduce our good friend, Dan Cellucci. Dan is the Chief Executive Officer at the Catholic Leadership Institute, an apostolate providing leadership training and consulting to more than 290 bishops, 2,700 priests, and over 35,000 deacons, religious, and lay leaders in more than 120 dioceses, a huge reach. Prior to his election as CEO, Dan served as Senior Vice President for CLI, working as the primary liaison with bishops and overseeing the apostolate's marketing and services. Dan is a sought-after advisor, consultant, and presenter for the church, playing a leading role in projects in the Archdiocese of Miami and Boston, as well as the Diocese of Pittsburgh and at the North American College, the NAC. Dan has also served as a member of the National Advisory Council for the USCCB, and he oversees research associated with CLI's Disciple Maker Index, a parish survey tool that seeks to help pastors and pastoral leaders focus their efforts toward evangelization. Since its inception, the Disciple Maker Index has reached over 3,000 parishes and 650,000 Catholics. Working with this incredible data and more than 25 years of field experience, Dan and his team have recently embarked on an ambitious plan to define what the next generation parish and diocese looks like for the next 10 years, at a very critical time for the church and the world. Dan and his wife, Tricia, are the proud parents of 4 children and live in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Tonight, he will take us through his new book, Clean Up on Aisle Mine, learning about life, leadership, and the Lord in the day-to-day. In this wonderful read, Dan curates nearly 8 years of his experience into this beautiful book, as Mitch indicated. So we think you'll enjoy the book and his comments tonight. Please welcome Dan Cellucci.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's here at the CIC. Just FYI, the books here are for you to take. No, you don't even have to buy them. In fact, you're going to perform a corporal work of mercy by taking them, because to ship them back to CLI would bankrupt us. So if you could just take 2, 3, however many you can carry, it's a great workout too. I want to offer just a few thank yous before we get started. First, to Mark and Napa for the support, and Mitch and the CIC. I have observed and heard about the CIC for a long time, but being from Philadelphia, never got to be here. It was my first time here. But then I went to the gala in October, and I was just super impressed. And then so when I got the email from Mitch inviting me to do this, I thought I was actually being punked. I could not believe that they were actually asking. So whoever canceled, I'm grateful to whoever canceled, but I'm also very grateful. It's very meaningful to me to be here. I want to offer a thanks to Archbishop Chaput. He's the Archbishop Emeritus of Philadelphia. Archbishop and I didn't know each other really most of the time that he was in Philadelphia, but toward the end of his time, I became CEO of Catholic Leadership Institute. That's where our office is. And so I went to go greet him as my ordinary and introduce myself. And I walked into his office and I said, "It's really nice to meet you." And he said, "Oh, I know who you are." And I said, "Well, I don't think we've met." He said, "No, I read about you every Monday." And so he had been getting these emails for somehow, and I was not aware of that. But and to this day, he reads everyone every Monday. He writes back, tells me if he liked it or did not like it, what he did not like or liked about it. For those of you who know Archbishop, but he was really the one, probably about 3 years ago, that started saying every time he would respond, "You need to put these into a book." And I said to him, "Archbishop, I don't think anybody would actually buy this book." He said, no, you got to do it. And then he introduced me to his publisher. And I said, here's my idea. And said, nobody's going to buy that book. So we went on Amazon. So that's why you can get it on Amazon. But I thank him for his encouragement. And I might reference a couple of the lessons that I've learned from him. Lastly, I just want to thank my wife, Tricia, who's here. She's the beautiful woman in blue. But she is my editor-in-chief in life. And not only just a fantastic mother and wife, but also just a fantastic leader in the church herself. So thank you for helping to get me to this point. So I thought this is not the normal talk that I would give. Usually I give like depressing statistics about parish life throughout the United States. This is a very different and special opportunity for me, especially as I celebrate 20 years at CLI. And so I thought it's a book of daily reflections. Your introduction was perfect, Mitch, around great bathroom read. In fact, when I first got it onto Amazon, of course, my mother was very affirming, as an Italian mother would be. And I said, the only people who are going to buy this book are my Italian aunts. And so I'm watching the sales on Amazon that looked like a flatline patient in the hospital. And then all of a sudden there's this spike. And I said, Tricia, like all of our dreams have come true. 3 people have bought the book. And my Aunt Maria texted me the next day a picture of 3 books that came her way from Amazon. And then I was at another party, and an Italian aunt said to me, Danny, congratulations on the book. I love it. I said, oh, thank you. And she said, yeah, she goes, I'm fascinated by the plot. And she said, I can't wait to see where it goes. And I said, Aunt Debbie, it's a daily reflection book. I'm not sure you're actually reading it. But so anyway, because it is a daily reflection book, I thought what I would do is read to you 3 of my favorite excerpts. They're short, but 3 excerpts that I think kind of capture some themes that are throughout the book, but also tie to my experience and perspective and our perspective at Catholic Leadership Institute about some lessons about the church. So I'm gonna read those posts. I'm gonna offer maybe a few reflections about that, and then if there's questions, I'd love to take those too. So I thought I would start with the title one, which is the January 1st, clean up on aisle mine, and kick it off there. I once took a personality profile that aptly described how I look at the world as one giant game of Frogger, where you constantly look to navigate around obstacles and barriers. It's true in my work, it's definitely true in my driving, and I find it true even in one of my favorite weekly activities, grocery shopping. Over years of navigating the aisles of my neighborhood Wegmans, I have become quite adept at knowing where to position my cart, the optimal times to avoid crowded aisles, but ensure stocked shelves, and the sequence of sections that allows for the ideal checkout and bagging scenario. I was making record time last Sunday morning, even impressing myself with my efficiency. As I parked my cart to grab my coffee for the week, I noticed a woman staring at a plethora of ground beans from which to choose. The only problem was that between where she was standing and the positioning of her cart, she was blocking 75% of the section and was right in front of my go-to morning brew. I bristled and chalked up the barrier to the shopper's complete lack of awareness, another pet peeve of mine in stores, airports, and generally anywhere humans gather. I pivoted to pancakes and returned to the aisle once the woman finished making what seemed like the most significant decision of her life. I passed the aisle again, now noticing she was peering closer at the labels. I left to grab my usual 4 boxes of cereal, confident that on my 3rd attempt, she would be gone. Still there. What was this lady doing? Deciding that I now needed to interrupt her and ask her to move, I started walking toward her as a college-age woman came from the other side of the aisle. She put her hand on the woman's shoulder and then hugged as the older woman began sobbing. "We don't need coffee anymore," the woman cried. "I don't need to make him coffee anymore." I heard the younger woman tell her mom that it was okay, and I decided I didn't need the coffee either. They needed that space more than I did. As I placed my groceries on the belt, my heart broke for the woman, and I felt more than a little guilty at how I had assumed she was simply clueless or rude. I wondered how often in my life or leadership I see people who are stuck as barriers to navigate around versus brothers and sisters who need care. Can I step away from my efficiency or strategy long enough to see the encounter the Lord might have in mind? Does the patience with which I believe God waits for me imbue how much I'm willing to give others? While the world needs problem solvers, it needs more faithful Christian witnesses. Witnesses don't seek to get around challenges, they bring a recognition of the Lord into them. Is my outcome to get through life or to see Him in life and help others to do the same? While loading my car, I saw the mom and her daughter walking arm in arm out of the grocery store. I hadn't gotten everything on my list, but left with much more than I expected. Prayers that you don't miss the perspective He's placed on the shelf for you this week. One of the most interesting times in the 20 years of ministry that I've gotten to do at CLI was during the pandemic. It's hard to believe that we are 5 years from those first crazy days. And I remember all these parishes that we were working with calling us frantically and looking for best practices or strategies on what they should be doing in this time. And we had a very clear answer. You should be calling your parishioners. Just pick up the phone and call them. And I can't tell you how much resistance there was to that call. They didn't want to do it. And they made up all sorts of excuses. It's going to be an invasion of their privacy. Well, they have your phone. You have their phone number. They gave it to you. Well, they're so busy. No, they're not. They're sitting at home, trapped in their house. What what it made clear to me was a reality that we see and continue to see, I think, play out in the after effects of the pandemic, which is this winnowing between parishes that are event-driven and parishes that are relationship-driven. The parishes that relied on events, the fish fry, the fair, even looking at Mass as an event, they were paralyzed because they couldn't do events. But the parishes and the pastors and leadership that had a mind toward relationship, that had a mind toward their people as their people, they did in some ways better during COVID because they weren't afraid to pick up the phone and say, "How are you?" And I think why is that the case for so many of our parishes that we're living in this, and pastors that we're living in this kind of event-driven reality that we can't pick up the phone and place those phone calls? I think it comes down to a lack of confidence. I think it comes down to a lack of patience and a lack of curiosity. So on the lack of confidence front, our research would say most Catholics are self-saying they don't know how to have a conversation about faith. So when I dug a little bit into the parishes who were saying we can't possibly call people, it's because they didn't know what they would say. They didn't know what they would say to their own community members if they picked up the phone and called them. Archbishop Chaput, again, as I mentioned, by the way, if it seems like I'm dropping his name, I am doing that on purpose multiple times. But I went to go see him once, and I was kind of in a desert moment. I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue doing what I was doing. And I said, Archbishop, I think I might be suffering from the sin of pride. I go into every room in all these dioceses, and I feel like I already know the story. He's like, and I said, to be honest, I think I'm the smartest person in the room. And he said, well, I've been in a lot of those rooms. You probably are one of the smartest people. And I said, well, that doesn't help. But he said, Dan, he goes, it doesn't matter how smart you are. God's not going to reward you for how smart you are. God's going to reward you for how patient you are. And that's the one that I struggle with. And so I think our parishes have a hard time with people who are struggling out of patience. They want it to be moving forward. They want to be seeing growth. They want all those things that we all want, certainly that I want, but they're unwilling to wait in the aisle for the moment. And last, I think there is a lack of curiosity. I went through an executive education program, and they made a strong difference between being a learner and being a knower. Are you a knower or a learner? A knower just goes in, they know what's already happening, they decide what needs to happen, they decide what that woman was doing at that aisle, and they move on. A learner displays curiosity, says, why is that happening, right? So when we meet people, especially people who rub us the wrong way, are we willing to kind of take a step back and ask why they might be stuck? Are we patient with them to ask that question? I have a colleague in ministry, and she always likes to say when something happens or we get a priest or a participant who's angry, she's always like, the thing is not the thing. The thing is not the thing. So can we look at each other, especially in moments of conflict or frustration, and just say the thing is not the thing? What might be going on for them in this moment? I'm going to move to my second post, and if you know me at all, you know that I love all things Italian, and I love Rome. It's my happy place, as they say. And Trisha and I will be taking our 4 kids in 20 days to Rome, which will be chaos. So please pray for us. 2 of them can't even make it around the block. They're so whiny. So I don't know how they're going to walk around the streets of Rome. But I used to want to be, when I was in high school, I wanted to be the ambassador to the Vatican when I grew up. That was kind of my dream job. And then I realized you had to give a lot of money to whoever became president in order to do that. And then I figured I was not going to work out so much for me. But I've gotten to work with other ambassadors to the Vatican. But I always love Rome. And Rome and I get to go there a lot, and Rome comes up a lot in the book. So I'm going to read to you this next one, which is my next kind of lesson as well. And it's called When It's Time. My love for Italy began long before I ever visited. When I was in middle school, my grandfather's first cousin Giovanni and his sweet wife Maria visited the United States, and we instantly connected. When I studied abroad in college, their home was my home away from home. I had my own little room in their Roman apartment. Zia Maria would feed me like you couldn't imagine, while Zia Giovanni would regale me with stories of his adventures with my grandparents. I remember how difficult it was to call them and let them know that my grandparents had passed. After that call, my wife and I agreed to visit them whenever I could get to Rome. Thankfully, for the last decade, work has allowed me to make the trip once or twice a year. That transatlantic flight hasn't gotten any easier as I've gotten older, and as the years passed, I could see how life was getting harder for my uncle and aunt. I convinced Maria to stop making dinner and took them to a restaurant. And once the restaurants were too hard to get to, we settled for some biscotti. But I always made the visit, and the visit always ended the same way. Giovanni and I would grab each other's cheeks and tell each other how much we loved each other, how important we were to each other, and how grateful we were to see each other once again. It was a long goodbye, even by Italian standards. Every time I rode up the tiny elevator to their apartment, I told myself, this could be the last time. Make sure they know. At my most recent visit this September, there was no meal, just some candies I had brought. Maria shared that they hadn't left the apartment too much in the year that we last saw each other. Their sons were taking good care of them, and now in their 90s, Maria was finally letting someone come in to help with things around the apartment every few days. When it was time for me to go, despite his frailty, Giovanni lifted himself out of his wheelchair and grabbed my face. We cried as we squeezed my cheeks, said the words we meant, and hugged until he couldn't stand anymore. Last Thursday, early in the morning, as I struggled to turn off my mind and fall back asleep, my cell phone illuminated with a text message from Maria and Giovanni's son. I didn't have to read it. I knew. It was time. While tears streamed down my face as I lay in bed, I felt so much peace because I knew he knew who he was to me. An ocean-sized distance helped me focus on letting my family abroad know how much they meant to me. I wondered if I was being that intentional closer to home. When did I last let somebody know how they blessed my life? The cheek squeezes may not work for everyone, but am I explicit in my affection so that when it comes time, there's never any doubt? In my relationship with the Lord, am I intentional in the way I pay a visit? He knows my heart already, but do I tell him what he means to me? On the last day of my study abroad program in 2003, Maria and Giovanni's first grandson was born, and I was there to hold him in the hospital. Francesco is now 21 years old, and when I go this year, I will squeeze his cheeks a little harder, tell him how special he is to me, and encourage him to come and visit his Uncle Dan one day in Philadelphia. As we walk our life journey with those who know we love them, let's not let it go unsaid this week. Ci vediamo, Giovanni. Archbishop Chaput, I think that's 4 times that I've mentioned his name, wrote a legit book called Things Worth Dying For. If you haven't read it, it's great. And he talks about really the things that are worth living for, why we live in the first place. And so I think for me, the biggest lesson, whether it comes down to me as an individual leader or to the people in our parishes or to our parishes communities as a whole, is who are we living for? What are we living for, right? And do we even know? I think particularly for those of us who are in ministry, I think this is a temptation. I think whether we work at the CIC or Napa or EWTN, I think we can very quickly fall into the temptation to think we're working for something and forget what we should actually and who we should actually be working for. I think we have to be careful. I give countless talks. I can't even keep count of the number of talks that I would give on evangelization, but I only need one hand to count the number of times I've talked about the Lord to my siblings. There's something wrong with that. There's something at stake, and I think we need to be really intentional as we love each other, that we are loving those who are most close to us, that we are saying the things that need to be said, and that those things involve the Lord whenever we have the chance. Which brings me to my last passage that I'm going to read to you. So we are going to Rome for the canonization of Carlo Acutis as a family, because our family has a devotion to Carlo. That devotion began because our son Peter when he was 7 in December of 2020, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Peter's going to be excited to go to the canonization. He's doing well. But this last post, I think, sums up the most important lesson that I think all of our parishes, but me especially as a disciple, need to keep in mind. And it's called Just Say Yes. I can't remember the context, but a few years ago when my wife and I had some quiet time together, she asked me what I wanted my epitaph to be. I remember thinking it was a strange and morbid question, and then I remember remembering that my wife is Irish, and it all made sense. My answer was, I wanted to be, he got people what they needed. As usual, she corrected my grammar and called me boring. But I have been a doer my whole life, and hopefully I've tried to be a good doer. I strive to get people what they need, oftentimes to a fault. As we have begun this brain cancer journey with Peter, one of the hardest things in these first 2 weeks has been not being able to do anything when all I am desperate to do is something. I can't make it go away. I can't shield him from the treatment road he will need to follow. At 7, I can hardly lift him without someone helping me. I can't make his sisters not afraid, and it breaks my heart because I'm the person who gets people what they need. As we approached Christmas Eve in the hospital, a social worker invited me to her office. She asked what Peter wanted for Christmas, and I shared that we were ahead of schedule this year and we had brought everything already. She pressed me to find out what he liked and then asked what his sisters liked. She said, we'll get some presents for all of them. Just jot down some ideas on this form. As I looked over the form, I thanked her and I told her that we were okay financially and we probably wouldn't qualify. The social worker looked at me and said, Mr. Cellucci, you don't need to do anything to qualify for the love people want to give. I began to cry. And she knelt down next to me, handed me some tissues, and said, Mr. Cellucci, just say yes. As I nodded, she asked me to verify my catholicleaders.org email address. And looking at it, she whispered, I'm probably not supposed to say this, but judging by your email address, you might know a little something about sacrificial love we don't need to earn. As people of faith, we often brace ourselves to say yes to the crosses that come our way. But are we as ready to accept the Simons that the Lord sends our way to help carry those crosses? Do I define myself by how much I can do or how much God can do for me? In this season of Christmas, we often hear 'tis better to give. But perhaps the goal we should all have for our epitaphs is that we were humble enough to let ourselves be loved and receive all the graces God sends our way every single day. Prayers that you recognize every blessing. So that journey that we have been on as a family, there's so many lessons that I continue to unpack, but I want to emphasize maybe two. One is the importance of the role of the church in our lives. And I know you know that if you're probably tuning in here. But according to our research, 62% of weekly mass goers, 62% agree that the church is critical to their relationship with God. Only 62% of weekly mass goers agree that the church is critical to their relationship with God. Those are the people who are going to mass. And while I would not wish our experience on anyone, I'm also so grateful for it. There has been no better catechesis for my two older girls on the role of the church than that journey. And even for their father, who works for the church, who talks about parish life all the time, to be able to experience that and the way that our community, not just our local parish, but the universal church that we are blessed to know and be a part of, showed up and helped us to see God, was astounding. People, at least when we do research around why people have converted to the faith, it tends to be around one of the transcendentals, truth, beauty, or goodness. The truth and beauty of the goodness of people in the church for us is amazing. We have at the time we had a parochial vicar who's now an abbot in India, and he asked to anoint Peter before he began chemo treatment. And so we brought Peter up in a wheelchair to church one Sunday, and Father Arul knelt down and grabbed his hands, and he said, "Peter, I don't care what you're feeling, if you're feeling angry or sad or worried, never alone. Never alone." And I can honestly say, and I think Tricia would agree with me, during all of that time, of all the things we felt, never once did we feel alone. Don't you know people in your life who need to know that? Don't you know people in your life who feel alone? What a gift the church is if we extend the invitation. Which brings me to the last lesson. As I said in the post, and as I think I did for the last 2 decades, I've been trying to help the church be better, improve, and I can attest to the fact that at certain points, I fall into the temptation of wanting to fix the church. And she doesn't need to be fixed. But ultimately, there's also things that I can't fix. And there's brokenness that can't be healed except by one person. And so the biggest temptation in our parishes, I think undergirding a lot of the struggles that we find, and the biggest temptation for me is to believe that I don't need a savior. And I need a savior. And I think we all just need to just say yes to this important fact. If we all just said yes to the fact that we need a savior, I think we would be in much better place. So I'm going to close just my remarks, and I would love some questions. Just with, if I can get there, words from our Holy Father on this point. He talks about this invitation in the Joy of the Gospel. He said, "No one should think that this invitation is not meant for him or her, since no one is excluded from the joy brought by the Lord. The Lord does not disappoint those who take this risk. Whenever we take a step towards Jesus, we come to realize that he is already there, waiting for us with open arms. Now is the time to say, 'Jesus, Lord, I have let myself be deceived. In 1,000 ways I have shunned your love. Yet here I am once more to renew my covenant with you. I need you. Save me once again, Lord. Take me once more into your redeeming embrace.'" Just say yes. Thank you very much.
I know for a fact that Tricia and my wife would be fast friends because Rosie calls me boring all the time as well. We've got a little bit of time for questions.
And I have a microphone here. So
great.
please, who's going to be first?
Mark's got one.
Wonderful.
So what was the inspiration to do this? And have you been tempted at different points along the way, not to write the book, but to do the reflections every week? And have you been tempted along the way to stop?
Yeah, good question. So the reflections actually almost didn't happen. So my predecessor in the role was doing just very brief quotes from the Pope Francis, because it was, he was taking the joy of the gospel and taking some quotes. So then when I moved into the CEO role, they were just like, we're going to continue those because it's a touch point basically, to the distribution list. And it was at a point where we were expecting our 4th child, a great gift from God, but not necessarily we were ready for that gift from God at the time. We were moving because we were having this 4th child, and I had just gotten to this new job. So it's like all 3 things that you shouldn't do at once, I was doing at once. We were doing at once. And so I just was in a really low place of not feeling at all competent to do any of those things. And they sent me this kind of draft that they had prepared for me. I mean, it was kind of a canned thing. And I was like, I just can't send it out. Like, that just doesn't sound like me. It's not me. It's not how I'm feeling right now. So I basically kind of scrapped it. And I said, I wrote out like a very short one, just saying like, I don't really know what I'm doing. Does anybody else, and I did, it was a similar kind of style, but it was very short and kind of raw. And the people on my staff were like, do you really want to send that out? And I was like, well, go for it. And I got a response back from this person in a parish somewhere in America. I didn't know who it was. And she just said, thank you. She's like, I was there today. And I thought like, okay. And then I got 2 or 3 more. Now, by the way, these posts continue to this day. There's not more than 3 or 4 people who are writing it. It's not like people are flooding in from America. But it's actually always 2 or 3 different people who say something stuck with them. So now I think it's this great gift. Like, I would never stop writing them. I think even if nobody was going to read them, because it has helped train my mind and my eyes and my heart to like see where the Lord is. And so what a gift to be expected, to be conscious of the way the Lord is working, or that you're not following. And so it's like almost like my weekly examination of conscience now in some ways. So yeah, they almost didn't happen, but I would never stop doing them even if I didn't need to send them out for CLI.
Full disclosure, we're friends.
We're real friends, unlike Mitch and I. Mitch said we're fake friends.
That's
so
fake
yeah.
friends. That's not,
Thanks.
no competition here. But so of course you can touch people who are outside of the organization. And I will say, and my confessor's not in the room, so this works. I mean, I have my own struggles with kind of connecting in that way. And I've certainly never when I want to read your email, always when I'm like, I read it and it hits me in a very, very profound way. Have you felt that that's a unifying force for your team? Like, would you encourage other people to do the same and to kind of take the leap and share from that place of vulnerability?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be authentic about it. So I think you have to do it if you're going to do it. You have to do it in a way that is how God beautifully made you. I do think we struggle a little bit with vulnerability, certainly as a church. And yet I think the ultimate metric of a success is a man who hung on a cross. So what more vulnerable position can one be? And I was actually in a conversation once with an atheist. They'd come into our office for some reason. They were in the building that we were in, and he was in executive coaching. And so he was fascinated by kind of what we were doing. And he talked about vulnerability, and he said the only way to be absolutely invulnerable is to be absolutely vulnerable. And then he pointed at the crucifix and he said, like that guy. And so I do think there's a call to be a little bit more vulnerable, especially for leaders, to say, you know what, I don't know what to do here. Anybody have any ideas? Or this happened, it was hard for me, here's why. I think the kind of, I have all the answers. I don't think people buy that anymore. I don't know if they ever bought it. So whether you can write it and feel comfortable putting out there, maybe is a different story. But I think in whatever way you can be authentically vulnerable, I think it's a call to be that way. I probably could be less vulnerable at times, according to my wife. But you're making me So I think it's got to be true to you and how God made you. But I think if you can share your brokenness, I think it invites other people to not feel so ashamed about their brokenness. And I think that's part of what will allow people to come to the Lord and ask the Lord to heal them, is that they want to be healed, but they don't have shame to ask for the healing. Any other questions?
Whether it's through these reflections or through your work with CLI, what are the things that bring you hope for the church right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was talking today. Where is he? There he is. Yeah, Pascal from YCP, Young Catholic Professionals. If you don't know, we have been doing some work at CLI. We do a lot of different types of research, but one of the things we've been doing in the last year, in particular, is looking at and talking to a lot of millennial and Gen Z Catholics, both Catholics who have been 2 feet out and Catholics who have 2 feet in. And the interesting thing about both of those groups is neither one of them want to register in an average parish today, which doesn't sound like a reason for hope. I can understand. However, especially for those who are in things like YCP or who come to Napa or who come to these nights or come to the CIC, there is such a great intentionality by those who are in these generations choosing the faith and choosing to learn and choosing to understand and choosing to wrestle. And I think that's such a healthy and good thing. I think it's going to be, I have this sense, I was saying to Pascal, I don't know why, but looking at data trends all day long, I feel like the next 5 to 7 years are going to be super bumpy and very disruptive. But I have this feeling 10 years from now that we're going to be having like a whole different set of conversations that just get me really excited. Because I think that the generations that are really trying to choose this life and ask the Lord to be present in their homes, I think there's just a lot of potential there. And so I think it's going to look different. There's no question it's going to look different, but I'm not afraid of that. Like I don't have any fear about that. I think that the Holy Spirit's going to continue to guide the church as the Spirit always has. And I think you have some hearts who are really ready and on fire to receive that message and take the lead. So that gives me a whole lot of hope. Yeah.
With that, please join me in thanking Dan.
Thank you. Thanks.
The book is called Clean Up on Aisle Mine. As Dan mentioned, for those of you here with us tonight, please come out into the bookstore and get your provided signed copy from Dan. There's 3